They will.
No one's clapping. No one's clapping.
Christians get spit on when they go to Israel.
And many Christians have bought into this, and they want to hate every Arab or Palestinian because they believe they're going to be blessed.
You know, this itself is going to be a serious blow, right, to AIPAC.
What happened to that building? 7. It just fell. It just fell.
This thing in Gaza happened.
This is where the con man, Cyrus Schofield, he got funded by...
But not only that, the Bible simply does not say that at all. They're teaching Jewish fables instead of the Word of God.
Why is Israel destroying these churches? Islam is a force of good. Islam can make America better.
Welcome back, everyone, to another powerful episode. Today's program is going to wake up a lot of people. Have you heard of Glenn Beck?
Charlie was starting to notice about the Israel lobby.
Could I answer my question? Could I answer the question, please?
Well, it looks like Americans are finally starting to see through the lies on who comes first.
And they will.
No one's clapping. No one's clapping.
Speaking of fear games, there's a new voice out there trying to stir up hatred and misinformation about Islam and Muslims.
We have to ask, have we made any progress at all in rooting the evil of radical Islam out of this country? Radical Islamic terrorism.
Mark this name down, Mr. Senator Tommy Tuberville. Mr. Tommy, come on, let's talk. We need to talk to people like you. They need to be educated. Yes, the same politicians using the old Sharia boogeyman, scare tactics to get attention. Now, my question is, how credulous do you have to be to fall for the political scams like that? It's the oldest trick in the book. Create an enemy, sell fear, and raise money off of this division. The question is, who's funding this guy? Follow the money, and the truth becomes clear. They're also conveniently, they forgot to mention the memo on 911 and his colleagues. You got senators and...
Building 7 was never hit by a plane. Why did it fall down?
There was never a steel building that ever collapsed.
And all the wackos would be like, Building 7, Building 7. I'd be like, shut up, wackos.
And Donald Trump, which I'll give you a copy
I've seen it. Yeah.
in his own words, says,
I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine.
Congressmen who are also bringing this up, but he forgot about that. But don't worry. We brought on someone today who deals with the reality, not this type of hate propaganda. My guest today is Dr. Abdullah Ali, a former Christian who embraced Islam after a journey of deep study and truth. He holds a PhD in cultural and historical studies, is an associate professor, and is someone who brings scholarship, clarity, and courage to the table. We're going to go ahead and break down the political weaponization of Islam hatred, the group responsible, this billion-dollar industry behind this, why truth always threatens corrupt power, and why submission to God, Islam, is not the enemy. Lies are. All that and more right now.
This is the Dean Show. This is the Dean Show.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you, Shay?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing fine, Eddie. I really appreciate the opportunity.
It's good to have you on. Let's get right into this video, a hearing that they had, and then we'll get your reaction to it.
Okay, inshallah.
Today to talk about one of the greatest threats facing our country today, Islamic extremism. You know, 24 years ago, September 11th, 2001, nearly 3,000 innocent Americans were murdered in a coordinated terrorist attack carried out by radical Islamic extremism. Those of us who lived through that day remember exactly where we were when those planes hit the buildings. That day changed this country forever. We were smacked in the face with the reality that there are people who are so hell-bent on destroying America that they will kill themselves just to try to harm us. That's reality. It sends shivers down your spine, but it's true, and it happened. In the aftermath of 9/11, we created the Department of Homeland Security. Basically, we went to war. We spent the following 2 decades unsuccessfully attempting to westernize the Middle Eastern countries most responsible for this attack. We strengthened surveillance and gave up personal freedoms in the hopes of preventing another large-scale attack. But 20 years later, we have to ask, have we made any progress at all in rooting the evil of radical Islam out of this country? Have we done it? Let's be honest. Radical Islamic terrorism didn't go away after 2001. In 2009, 13 people were killed in a mass shooting at Fort Hood by an Army psychiatrist who was radicalized by Islamic teachings. In 2013.
Okay, so you got we got so many problems here in America, but somehow it's being shifted now again to Muslims. We got to get rid of Islam. We got to get rid of this Islam out of America. And he starts bringing up things from the past. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I have quite a number of thoughts on this, and I guess probably a good place to begin. Former President John Adams, where he said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And then also there's a quote from Thomas Jefferson where he says, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be." So what I was saying is that probably a good place to begin is with just 2 quotes, one from former President John Adams, where he says, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And then Thomas Jefferson is quoted as having said, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be." So we are taking part in a new campaign cycle. There's a lot of course, a lot at stake for many different people. And I think as Muslims, we have to adjust to an expectation that when there is a new election process going on, that there's going to be an increase in hatred against Muslims, especially from parties that Muslims generally don't actually support in mass, right? So so this particular video naturally beginning with, of course, mention of 9/11, this particular event, and of course the supposed claim that Muslims are responsible for all those deaths. The thing that's good for us, I would say this time around, is that more and more Americans are aware of the inconsistencies in that particular narrative on both the right and the left. And they don't really buy into especially the claim that Muslims caused the towers to fall, right? So even if you were to say, okay, well, maybe there were some Muslims in the airplane, I don't think that many people who are reasonable would say that, okay, well, that Muslims, they actually were the ones who actually made the towers fall at free fall speed, and then Tower 7 falls, et cetera, things like that, right? So, and one thing also one would notice is about this is that it seems that anytime something bad happens to America, for example, or to the West in general, there's the claim or the belief that it has to be something that came from outside of the United States, right? You know, the America is so pure, the country is so pure, the people are so pure that if anything bad happens, has to happen because of something coming outside of the actual boundaries of the country. And this is something that a lot of people, many different groups and cultures, civilizations, they sort of suffer the same sort of ideas or delusions, I guess you would say, about their own, or rather perhaps we say they fail to realize that they themselves have actually become so like corrupt and their civilization is decaying so much that they don't realize, you know, that much of what is happening is self-inflicted. So Muslims suffered in this way too, right? You know, because you can look into the Islamic tradition, you can come up with some ideas, some examples of this from the Islamic tradition. You know, but we want to focus on that right now. But but fundamentally, his premise is that, okay, Muslims, they themselves are responsible for a lot of violence. They have killed a lot of Americans. They're radicalized by Islam, which is the presumption. The presumption is that they're radicalized by Islam, not by conditions, in society in different parts of the world, and et cetera, things like that. But even to suggest that most Muslims are radicalized, right? So, and this is a failed attempt. It's going to be another failed attempt. People have been attempting to pass anti-Sharia legislation for more than a decade now, and it always fails because eventually what happens is that when they try to talk about the constitutionality or the lack of constitutionality of attempting to ban a religion, ban a moral code, then it always fails because we have the First Amendment, et cetera, things like that. But most of it, and a lot of these people actually know, they're actually aware of this, they know it, but they just play on the emotions of their particular constituents. And this is why, again, the quotes from John Adams and from John Jefferson are very important, because one pertains to the importance of morality, and the other pertains to the importance of having a proper education. That our educational system has failed failed Americans, right? Such that it is possible for people like this to act as demagogues, and they themselves radicalize. They themselves actually, there's a saying that goes, every accusation is a confession, right? So fundamentally what he is doing is further radicalizing his base, right? If anything, because he's feeding them false information in order to get them to come out and vote, in larger numbers, so that they can continue to have their way. But it is important for Americans and others to realize the degree of the manipulation that is involved with these type of statements.
I've had a couple guests of mine bring this up to me. The recent one was by the name of Dr. Jones, and he mentioned the Sheldon Group.
Charlie Kirk was getting $2 million a year from the Shillman Foundation. The Shillman Foundation is the main source of Islamophobia in the United States of America. It's a big rich.
And then I had another Allison Weir from If Americans Only Knew. She also mentioned that the people that are behind this hatred of Muslims and Islam, the hate industry, are the Zionists. So my recent guest, Dr. Jones, mentioned the Sheldon Group. I don't know if you've heard of them, and how they were the ones who were paying Charlie Kirk $2 million.
Yeah. Charlie Kirk was getting $2 million a year from the Shillman Foundation,
his organization, a year, and then they pulled it. And then my guest said these are the ones who are the main conspirators behind pushing this anti-Islamic bigotry, this Islamophobia machine. So now, who is he? The question I'd like to know is if people can find out who's funding him, because again, you have all of these issues that we're having in the society in America that we could be working on to, from the porn that's destroying the homes, OnlyFans, you got, this gender confusion, the 100,001 genders now that we can agree on with Christians. We can come and work on a common good together. But all of it, fatherless homes, things that are really the core issue that's destroying society. But now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this guy comes. And now he gets some traction because, he's talking about what kind of fears into that. It's that manufactured fear, that fear mongering, that it's like a, Hollywood movie. That's like there's an audience for that. So he feeds into that machine. So I'd like to know, what do you what are your thoughts on that? Who's funding this guy? Where did he just come from? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he just creates this film, and now he's out there pushing this this propaganda. But the good news, like you think, many Americans are waking up to this. But what are your thoughts on that? Who's funding him, and why all of a sudden I never heard of this person, but all of a sudden, out of the blue, out of thin air, here he comes, and then people start to follow. It's like it's almost someone's choreographing this.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's really weird and it's strange, and there's good reason to believe that the particular the Sheldon group, as you mentioned, that and other AIPAC and other connected type of groups are funding these type of politicians, which are a large number of them, as we know. And in the months leading up to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I actually started to try to engage with him much more, at least like online. I don't know if you ever read any of my messages, my refutations of him, that sometimes, because he would come out, he would do anti-Muslim posts, right? And so prior to his assassination, it seemed like between himself and Laura Loomer, they were the only two, well, the main two who actually were trying to deflect from Israel's crimes, right? And so I saw the pattern, and I started to say, well, okay, I can, if you watch the news and then you hear something about Palestinians being killed, you can guarantee your best bet that the next day Charlie Kirk is going to do something, do a post about something about Islam, and Laura Loomer is going to also do the same thing, right? And I tried to highlight this and point this out multiple times to Muslims and people who are online, and so to me, the anti-Muslim hysteria, anti-Sharia hysteria also is still a continued attempt to try to hide the crimes of the Zionists, right? And so what is really fascinating too is that how it's increased. Like all of a sudden, like is this really expanded? So even like your so-called mainstream conservative, some of the MAGA folks even, who actually are now attacking Islam and Muslims and talking about the importance of banning Islam, shipping Muslims out of the country. And people even tell me I need to go back where I come from, because I assume they think that I'm not an American. I guess they think I came from Africa. But I grew up here. My parents, my grandparents, great grandparents. Of course, all of us go back to somewhere. But this idea.
Do you also come from a Christian background?
Yeah, my family does. I mean, my parents were Christians, and they actually entered Islam through the Nation of Islam under the guidance of Elijah Muhammad, called sort of the first resurrection. And then once he passed away, they followed Imam W.D. Muhammad into Sunni Islam. But I wasn't really raised with any particular indoctrination, where I was more like a cultural Muslim. The same thing with all my siblings. My older siblings, they did get an indoctrination into the original Nation of Islam teachings, right, from the first resurrection. But I eventually just chose Islam on my own, right? And most of my siblings still identify as being Muslims, but that is our background. Most of my relatives are Christian. Almost all my relatives are Christian, right? So it's so it's really, I do think that there is a strong or a good reason to believe that the people we suspect are funding these people are those who actually are funding them, because they feel threatened by, like, for example, like in New York, we have like Mamdani. Now, of course, Mamdani, I don't agree with his politics, his ideology, but Mamdani, has said certain things that give the Zionists reason to fear that, that especially organizations like AIPAC, that if he were to win, it would remove the veil of invincibility, right, from AIPAC, for example, because a lot of the politicians, at least we believe, that the reason why they continue to cater to AIPAC in their interests is because they fear that they're going to be primary, they're going to be primary because of AIPAC money, right? So they continue to sort of be toadies. They obey uncritically the orders of AIPAC. So if he were to win, Nathan, that itself would sort of smash that or just shatter that veil of invincibility. And then the same thing would apply if someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's also, they're attempting to primary her because she's actually real MAGA, and then you have like Thomas Massey as well. They want to primary him because he's also actually real MAGA, right? So, but if they win their reelection bids, this itself is going to be a serious blow, right, to AIPAC, right, and that Jewish lobby that's that so many people believe are controlling so many of our politicians.
You mentioned the 911 that this individual, this politician, was talking about, but it's very interesting. If we could find this clip where we have former senator, congressman, you got the golden boy, former golden boy of Fox News, Tucker Carlson.
You tried the other day to raise science-based questions about 9/11, and you asked, Building 7 was never hit by a plane. Why did it fall down in exactly the same way the first two towers did?
156 witnesses, first responders saying they heard explosions before the buildings came down. There was never a steel building that ever collapsed because of a fire.
They are all questioning, just like the over thousands of architects and engineers who are questioning the official story. And you just mentioned this, that this is something that is now contrary to what he's talking about, that actually exonerates Muslims. Definitely Islam has nothing to do with it. There's no justification for it. But more people are waking up to this. This is we're seeing a shift. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing the same thing?
Exactly.
It's a huge shift. What happened to that building 7? It just fell. It just fell.
Right.
It's an illusion. What is that, David Copperfield? What happened there?
Yeah, I think what really did it, or rather the starting point of all of this was COVID, the COVID lockdown, right? I think during the COVID lockdown, people were hyper politicized, right? Because of course during the COVID lockdown we had the election of Biden. Biden became president, and so it was a contentious competition between himself and Trump. And then when we had the COVID lockdown and the imposition of the vax mandate, among other things. And then also what was happening was a lot of censorship occurring during that particular period, right? During the COVID lockdown, right? And so many people start to realize at that moment that the corruption in the government was not only in, say, for instance, in certain sectors, right? The government, they can actually come to realize that systemically there's a problem, right? There's a problem in the pharmaceutical industry. There's a problem with the media. There's a problem with just overall distrust, right, in the government, right? And so those particular people having their freedoms restricted even more, right, beyond what actually happened after 9/11, I think that it started to really wake people up and realize, you know what, I mean, this has to change, right? This has to change. And there's a Trump factor too. I mean, what Trump preached, during his election bid, among other things, about trying to restore America to what it was. And a lot of people believed in that. And so that sort of made people realize, that there's really rot and it goes really, really deep, right? So there were these memes going around the conspiracy theorists are right again, right? Or you need a conspiracy theorist, right? Because the conspiracy theorists, all the theories or things that are considered conspiracy theories became conspiracy facts. So more and more Americans are becoming more aware of that. And then on top of that, once this thing in Gaza happened, it's even worse because you have on TikTok all of these non-Muslims now getting the opportunity to see the savagery, the sheer savagery practice against the Palestinians, right? And so the Jewish lobby, they lose the generation, especially the current generations, Gen Z, of course, more so on the left than the right, but even Gen Z on the right, like from 35 and under, right? They have a very negative view of Israel at this point. Right, so the former evangelical influence, through the Schofield Bible and things like that in itself is really waning, right? So there are multiple layers to this, and then as more people become aware of just how leveraged our politicians are, or rather how much they are in the pockets of these powerful lobbies, especially the Zionist lobby, then people start to demand more. They start to demand real change, and this is what we're seeing. This is my opinion.
You mentioned the Schofield Bible. For those that don't know, I think this is a key right there. This is something when people go down that rabbit hole, the Schofield Bible, dispensationalism, John Nelson Darby, these are keywords I want you guys to really look up. This is where the con man, Cyrus Schofield, he got funded by the Zionists, the Rothschilds, and then what happens? They come up with this political tool to go ahead and give credence to the modern day state that they have. And and here we are today, because in the footnotes, the exegesis of certain verses, whoever blesses thee is blessed. And I actually spoke on the phone to Charlie Kirk about this in our phone conversation. We talked about
I remember that.
And he knew what he said. Yeah, dispensationalism. We kind of shifted over. We touched upon that, and I was just like I'm talking about now. I said, "Do you know about this?" And he was listening to me. So I think this is something that really Christians really need to take a deep dive in, because they feel it's a part of their, what we say, Aqidah, their theology, that they're sinful if they don't support this. That's why many of them are seeing their own brothers and sisters in Christianity, their church is being bombed, their church is being destroyed, and they're just like, hush, hush. They're not saying nothing because you got preachers and teachers here who are promoting the teachings of this con man, Cyrus Schofield. Your thoughts on that, and then we'll get into. I want to get into another video. I'm going to show how people are actually waking up to everything we're talking about. Go ahead. Your comments on what I just said.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with you. I think.
Are you familiar? You're familiar with all of this I've said?
Oh yes, yeah. I'm of course roughly. I mean, I don't have. I'm not like an expert on that particular topic. Of course, my colleague Dr. Ali would. He's my he would be like the one I would defer to. He actually offices are right next to one another. I know you interviewed him before.
Yes. He knows earlier, very extensively about this. I'm sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So. But yeah, so I've loose ideas about it. So I definitely agree with it. I do think that that this has played a major part in a lot of what we've seen. So I think there are three particular elements to like why we're seeing more videos like the one that you played at the beginning, right? There's a political element, as I highlighted. That okay, there's a campaign right now, right? They want to make sure that they themselves prevent any particular politician who actually may undermine the influence of Israel, at least the Zionists in Israel, from actually hurting them. Right? So that's kind of the goal that's there. But there's a religious element too, right? Religious element in that. Who is this appeal to? Who are they appealing to? They are appealing to the Christians, especially those who actually embrace the Schofield Bible, and the concept of dispensationalism, right? So they're appealing to them because Christians, we know. I mean, I know you. I believe you come from a Christian background as well. Right? That Christians, like Muslims, that we are proselytizing faiths, right? That we want to. We look for converts, right? We look for converts, and Muslims, of course, are the greatest competition that the Christians have. They don't have competition with Jews because the Jews are not going out trying to convert people, at least not to their religion. They're converting them to their ideology or their millah, we would call, in the sense that their worldview, and they'll find different ways to do that. Some perhaps maybe righteous, but a lot of them are very vicious ways that actually get people to actually to follow their particular way. So there's a religious element, but there's also an age element in the sense that it seems to me, I could be wrong about this, but it seems to me that most of the people who actually would consider this to be a strong or persuasive appeal are what we call the boomers generation, right? Boomer Christian generation, white Christian boomer, and that they themselves receive that original indoctrination into the Schofield Bible, right? And so I think that they don't realize that the world is moving beyond them, right? But they're still clinging. They think the world still exists in that particular form, and so I think that that's an element of this as well, right? And but I think that they ultimately they're going to fail, because I just think that things have changed so much, and that so much has been revealed that it's hard to put the rabbit back into the hat, or whatever the expression is. So I think that that's fundamentally what's happening right now.
All right, before we get into what is Sharia, we'll talk about that and kind of unpackage it and see how much of ignoramus this person looks like, after we kind of, just kind of unpackage it. I want to get into this next video here, because this is Glenn Beck now. And he's on the stage at Charlie Kirk's what is it? Changing USA. What is it called? His organization.
Yeah, Turning Point
yeah,
USA.
Turning Point USA. And just look at the audience now.
Israel has an overwhelming lobby over the United States government, and we have unconditionally supported them. We have fought their wars in the Middle East. Bibi Netanyahu came to our Congress in the 90s, told us a list of countries that we need to take out. Some were Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, etc. Through those wars, we have lost trillions of dollars. We have lost American servicemen.
We're lobbying everybody else, and they will.
No one's clapping for your turn. Charlie was starting to notice about the Israel lobby.
Could I answer my question? Could I answer the question, please?
You're talking about one thing they don't teach in school? They don't teach about the USS Liberty, where Israel literally came, blew up an American ship because they want us to get in their war with Egypt, and they don't teach that in school. I mean, I'm just saying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question.
I have a question. Why is there this societal taboo around criticisms of Israel? For example, AIPAC doesn't have to register as a foreign lobby, but like the Australia lobby does. And it just
that should be changed. That should be corrected. Look, I am not going to say Israel should have any special privileges. None.
Your thoughts? Looks like the new generation is waking up. They're really taking a deep dive, going down some of these rabbit holes, and they're bringing up to somebody, an old school guy like Glenn Beck. You know, I'd love for someone like you, for us to be able to talk with someone like Glenn Beck, see if there's any good can come from that, because he's been a voice in the media for some time. Everybody can change for the better, but he's part of that hate machine, that fear mongering. What are your thoughts on this? He was really put on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, you can see a lot of like discomfort, right? In his
you
body
saw his
language.
face. Yeah, you saw his face.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and he knew that. Oh my God, this is trouble, right? You know, this is trouble. And again, it seemed like that's what Charlie observed as well, right? You know, and it seemed like up until his final days that that he was starting to move away, right, from that understanding. I mean, it's just unfortunate. A lot of the negative things he's had to say about Islam and say about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what makes it difficult for Muslims to see any much good in him, right? And in that sense, I don't really blame people for having a very negative view of him, right? But I do think that it is important, especially for Muslim leaders, to develop a larger bird's eye view of things, right? And I think one thing I appreciate about you, I mean, you've been around for a couple of decades, if not more than that, doing what you're doing, is that it's always clear. Your message is always clear, regardless of who you have. It's like, listen, Islam is the truth. I want people to become Muslim. Islam is a force of good, right? Islam can make America better, right? And that's a very consistent message that, but fundamentally what, like for instance, this congressman, what he's trying to do is trying to paint Islam as a foreign invader, and that Muslims who are here are actually people all came from overseas. Imagine more and more videos of white converts, right, to Islam, right, or indigenous black converts to Islam, like being much more prominent in the public sphere, so familiar faces, familiar voices, familiar experiences in history, then they can't really do anything about that, right? Once that becomes like the normal sort of face of Islam, but that's happening at the same time. So it is fascinating. It's great to see the change happening, right? That people are waking up, especially the young people, and so to see people like him just be made to feel very, very comfortable is really it's refreshing, right? To see that.
Let me get into this next clip. This is of a Christian pastor kind of talking about what we're talking about, the same thing.
The Bible says we have to bless Israel or God won't bless us. Who's heard something similar? Oh yeah, got to bless Israel or God won't bless you. Now here's the thing. The modern day nation of Israel is not a lucky rabbit's foot. As long as you rub it, God will be good to you. It doesn't work that way. But not only that, the Bible simply does not say that at all. The Bible does not say anywhere in the Bible to bless Israel, yet especially the modern day nation of Israel. And I'm going to prove to you that that statement is a lie. And there are many pastors of guys that I want to name, but I won't. Guys that if I named, many of you across the room would say, oh, I know that guy. Yeah, I know that guy. And they're telling Christians that we have to support war in Iran. And they're teaching hatred as a commandment of man. They're teaching Jewish fables instead of the Word of God. Jesus said, blessed be the peacemakers. God is not a racist, and God doesn't approve of racism. This is so important. And many Christians have bought into this, and they want to hate every Arab or Palestinian because they believe they're going to be blessed being Israel's buddy, and any enemy of Israel must be my enemy. Folks, this is not in the Word of God.
It's shameful. This is not in the Word of God. Pastors like him, we need more of them. They're speaking up, brave enough. What do you think when you hear that?
Yeah, no, I'm seeing more and more of this. Actually, I'm seeing more and more pastors speaking in this way. And one comment I made to a friend of mine after, the October 7th and all the genocide itself, which occurred, has been ongoing since then, is that this particular time around, it's different because we've seen many of these conflagrations, there in that part of the world, or again, assaults on the Palestinian people over our lifetimes. But this one was different in that not only you have people waking up to the savagery of the Israeli sort of IDF and others, right? But also more and more Christians are becoming more aware of original Jewish teachings, right? Especially teachings in the Talmud, right? So in that sense, even the religion is being placed under serious scrutiny this time around, similar to the way that Muslims or Islam has been placed under scrutiny like post 9/11, right? At least the Quran and things like that. And so when the Christians being made aware of like, well, what did they believe about, right? Jesus, for example, they're like, whoa, right? So you see a lot of these multiple MAGA voices, right? Who are actually publicly, I'm like, Dan Bilzerian and, there are others like them who are like, not only talking about like, what the Zionists have done, their violence itself, but also like just their beliefs, right? So there's like, I didn't know that they believe this, I didn't know that Christians get spit on when they go to Israel. Right. Why is Israel, destroying these churches, right? Why are they chasing out the last traces of Christians in that part of the world, right? So people, they're hearing these things, they're really outraged and they say, oh my God, these people really are not our friends. We thought they were our friends, right? And again, of course, and I'm not saying that to try to inspire anyone to hate Jews, because we know that there are a lot of Jews who actually are on the side of the Palestinians, right? Many of them on the side of Palestinians here. But this idea of Israel being a Jewish state, what that doesn't mean is it's a religious state, right? Okay, they're religious people in Israel, right? But Israel is, again, as a secular state. Most of the people there don't believe in God to begin with, right? And they're like the gay capital, one of the gay capitals of the world, right? So when people say, well, do you believe that Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state? And say, well, what do you mean as a Jewish state? You mean like as a racist apartheid, state? I mean, so it's okay for one to exist but not another, or even if you say you think of Jewish as a theological, right, issue, right, as a theocracy. So Israel is a theocracy. I thought theocracies were evil; they were bad. So why is it that we make this exception, carve out this exception for Israel, but not for somewhere like Iran or some other place, right? But again, there's just a lot of confusion, and the more people become aware and they're educated properly, then we'll be able to eventually transcend a lot of this confusion that we see in people's minds, and hopefully, some semblance of justice will come for the Palestinians, for other people as well, right?
Let's talk about now this word Sharia, and usually right away I'll mention to people the story. I've had different Jewish rabbis on the show, and I asked them, is there such thing as Jewish Sharia? And they said, yeah, it's Jewish Sharia. That's the law. That's the law we go by. Then you have the canon law. You have for Christians, the canon law. You got the 10 Commandments. Arabic speaking Christians have gone by their version of Sharia also. So, when you start to unpackage this, really, people like this look really, really stupid. I mean, because we have Muslims are praying 5 times a day. Muslims are giving in charity, smiling at their neighbor, having families, all of this. And you're an expert now in Sharia law. Is that correct? Can you tell us what is the Sharia? Because they try to make it like it's the boogeyman coming to get you. Like we're trying to now just take over, crush the Constitution. Which actually in the Constitution you have some it's like, oh, I've heard. You're also a professor of history. I don't know if this is true, but I keep hearing this over and over that the founding fathers, and when they put the Constitution together, they got much of the Sharia teaching from the Quran, from Islam. What are your thoughts?
Well, the Sharia itself is an Arabic term, as we know, which linguistically it means the path to water, right? And so one of the cognates of the word Sharia is shira, which means the sail on the ship, right? So the concept itself is fundamentally that the Sharia is the vehicle by which the human being reaches a state of purity. That's the whole fundamental concept itself. So in another sense, you can translate it as the revealed law. Now, Sharia is not only, or rather is not synonymous with what we call Islam, right? The Sharia is just simply part of Islam, right? And when we look at the Quran is more of a book of ethical teaching than it is a book of law, right? The actual legal aspects of the Quran only make up between 4 and 12% of the verses of the Quran, and that just depends on what particular scholar you're listening to. For example, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya was of the view that there are only 364 verses in the Quran that pertain to law out of more than 2,600.
What's that percentage-wise? If we go by that, what's the percentage then? Is that like 4%?
No, it's just a little bit more than 4%. But like the 100 by 150 verses, like Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi says 150. That's more like 4%. If my math is correct, right? But the highest number has been said 500. Which I calculate is like 12%, like of the Quran itself.
So between 4 and 12%.
Right, between 4 and 12% of the Quran itself. So in that sense, the Quran is more of a book of ethical teaching as opposed to a legal book, a legal manual, right? But the Sharia itself, again, is a legal dispensation. It sort of it comes after the teachings of Jesus, which come after the teachings of Moses, etc. So every prophet was either given a Sharia, a revealed law from God, or they themselves simply followed or reinforced or renewed the Sharia of a previous prophet, right? So in that sense, when we think of the Sharia, it's a really nothing more than a continuation of what had been taught by previous prophets, right? So it's like to be against the Sharia law itself is to say that to be against God's law. Now, how crazy does that sound, right? It's like I'm against God's law, right? You claim to be a person of God, but you're against God's law, right? So we just happen to call it Sharia. In the Quran, the word Sharia only appears one time in the Quran. It wasn't a very common word in use during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? But eventually in Islamic history, it became very common, right? But Sharia, we have some aspects of it which are immutable, right? In other words, they can't change. They're static aspects of the law. But then there are other aspects which are dynamic, right? In Arabic we call them the thawabit and mutaghayyirat, right? So there some are some fixed and some are they're mutable. Right, but if we were to try to summarize what the Sharia itself represents, we would say that the Sharia represents a list of goals which pertain to certain interests. In other words, that the Sharia seeks to realize the goal of the protection of faith, of bodily integrity, of sanity, of property, and progeny, and some add of honor, right? So in other words, anything that interferes or disrupts or undermines faith, bodily integrity in life, sanity, one's family and progeny, and right, one family and progeny or honor, then that itself is contrary to the Sharia.
Let's point that out, because I think anybody out there who's of sound reason, he would agree with these points, right? So you got the protection of life. This is part of the God's law, Sharia, right? Protection of one's life, one's wealth. Did you say one's wealth? This is why gambling would be prohibited. So there's wisdom behind that. What you say, the intellect, protection of the intellect.
Yes.
That's why alcohol will be and drugs will be prohibited. I don't think anyone's saying no. Stop here now. What else did we miss? We got
and we mentioned life, faith,
family, lineage.
Right. Yeah.
We got lineage, so family.
Yeah.
So that's why fornication is something that's that's not allowed. It's got you have to be married. I mean, who's gonna say why would someone object to that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, why do you object to it? And this is why a common question I ask people especially these politicians, because a lot of them, like, Ron DeSantis and others, they've been posting, Chip Roy posting about like how Sharia needs to be banned. And I always ask them, like, what is Sharia?
What is it?
What is Sharia?
You don't even know what you're saying. That's the thing that blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, Governor Greg Abbott is another one. Greg Abbott, he was probably one of the first ones to come up with this. And then, they claimed recently to say, Governor Greg Abbott officially, he abolishes Sharia in Texas. And again, the not very bright people, unfortunately, very naive people actually believe he actually did do this. He achieved this goal, right? But they don't understand what Sharia is themselves, right? Or they have, there's something that they project on the Sharia, which actually does not originate from the Sharia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think these asking this question is very powerful. Like, what is it? I mean, what is Sharia? Maybe they think so. They usually think, okay, amputation of the hand for the thief. What else do they think? They have all these negative. They think of the penal code. Usually, it's the penal code. So I give this example. Imagine if Martians came from outer space, and they wanted to know about the Constitution, and all you told them was about the electric chair. If you told them about lethal injection, and you told them about the other punishments that there are in the legal system, for example, and then they left, and that's what they knew about America, about the Constitution. That wouldn't be a fair assessment or an explanation. It would not. So now when you talk about Islam, you forget about the pure monotheism of Islam, the family values, the eradication of poverty to zakat. So all of these things that are there that are for the betterment of the human being and society, they forget about that and just go to the penal code. The same way you left the aliens with the electric chair or hanging at one time.
Right. And again, the whole purpose is to send the message to the naive and gullible voter.
Naive and gullible, yeah.
Right. That this is something you need to be afraid of. It's very violent. It's going to be very hurtful. Listen, you don't live a good life. You don't live a righteous life, do you? I mean, you commit a fornication and adultery. You know what Muslims say about that? Right, they say that you're supposed to be lashed. They say you're supposed to be stoned. They say they want people to get their hands chopped off if they steal something, right? And so again, it's you can understand the anxiety that it produces in someone, But the thing is different about this time is that, again, most of the people who are coming out speaking out against Sharia, they're not even focusing on the penal code, right? They're actually accusing Islam of things that Islam says nothing about, right? Because even the congressman who you started this particular interview off with, the longer video, he's saying things like, that Muslims consider it okay to rape women and et cetera, the pedophilia, this, or, so he's talking all of these things. He's saying these things that he knows a lot of Christians today, they want to hear, right? A lot of these Christians are on the right because quite often, over and over, like, I'll do a post and I'm critical of someone on the right, and then I always have someone commenting, especially on X or Twitter, formerly Twitter, probably should still be called Twitter, but that's a different story altogether. But like I'll do a post or I challenge something someone says, and then someone will come and say, well, your prophet was this or was that, right? So I'm just like, and I just ignore it because I know that this is an individual I really can't have a reasonable exchange, a conversation with, because that particular conversation requires a really a sit down it requires for a person to sit down and actually question one's own reality, how you've actually even come to develop a distaste for certain things. Things haven't always been this way. So like in the context of history, of moral and cultural history, that particular conversation must be had. But you can't have that, especially not on like a platform like X, especially with people who may or may not even be real, right? Because that's the other thing too, is like sometimes these might just be bots, right? That actually are just part of the system, or agent provocateurs, so you don't really need to get into a lot of those type of discussions on that particular platform.
It's like these politicians are almost like scammers who are taking advantage of credulous customers. So
yes.
That's what it comes down to. But if they spend a little time with actually somebody like yourself and others who are a little bit educated, and they sit and they're sincere, come visit Muslims in the mosque. We're not trying to hide the book. We'll give it to you for free, the Quran. Unlike some who actually don't want you to read the book. And imagine, what do you think would happen if you had these politicians trying to ban the Talmud, for instance? And they would actually, Christians would actually have more pretext to want to do that because of what it says about Jesus burning in the excrements of the hellfire, or his mother being a I don't even want to say the name, being adult, somebody who did lewd acts, but the Quran actually has a whole chapter named after Jesus's blessed mother, confirms he was the Messiah, he's a prophet, healed those born blind and the lepers by God's permission.
Is a word from God. Is a word from God. Is a spirit from God.
Really blows my mind. We have so much in common. We honor Jesus. You say one disrespectful thing about Jesus or his mother, this could take you out of Islam.
Yes, exactly.
But somehow we're the enemy. Somehow we're the enemy. But your bestie over there is spitting on him. Hates him. So I don't get it. What do you think?
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that with people like this who hate Muslims or hate Islam, that they fail to understand is that the more that you tell someone not to do something, they want to do it, right? And that's the same thing that happened after 9/11, that people thought, okay, well, after 9/11, nobody's going to want to become Muslim. But more people became Muslim as a result of 9/11, even though I don't accept that Muslims they did it. I don't accept this narrative, But that was one of the mistakes I considered our leadership they made during that time, was to embrace the narrative right away, And Muslims, because
you're one of the few I've seen. You're one of the few that weren't like the sheep that were just going along with this, because it seems like you did your research. Many have not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, I was affected at first by it, like everyone else, right? Because it's like, well, this is a narrative, But it wasn't very long after that I shifted. I said, well, something's up. And it's a similar thing that happened to me with COVID. Whereas when COVID happened, and they started to tell everyone that they needed to stand 6 feet apart, they need to wear these masks. Then eventually the so-called vax came out. Then they say, well, you got to take the vaccine to protect, the people who, are vulnerable. I said to myself, listen, I've been, I'm half a century, on this planet. I've been an American my entire life. I've been Black my entire life. And I've never seen my government this concerned about my well-being. Right. And I said, well, something's up. Something's really up here. Right. But when it came to, of course, the 9/11 event, I think that maybe that first year I was like everyone else, but eventually, I woke up eventually, and I said, well, and I started to see a lot of the conspiracy theories, loose change, and a lot of these sort of videos were coming out, about what actually occurred. And I said, well, no, it's not really adding up. And so for a very long time, I've been, again, very distrusting and the official stories, official accounts of things, right?
And that's what our dean, it teaches us to be critical thinkers, to really think outside the box, and to not be so narrow-minded when it comes to this. And this is, we could take a lesson from someone like you, for many of the other imams and muftis and leaders to really take an example from your book.
Yeah. I think the main thing is that you have to, you cannot allow for the conditions on the ground to rattle your emotions. You can't allow people to instill or induce anxiety into you, right? To make you fearful, overly fearful, or angry. Of course, I mean, advertisers, they take advantage of our lusts and our desires, so they say, hey, well, we know that you like this. It's naturally you like these type of things, so they want to sell certain things to you. Politicians, they take advantage of our fear and our anger. They make us hate people. This person doesn't like you. You shouldn't vote for that person. Oh, so-and-so is going to hurt you. How can you vote for so-and-so when those people don't like you? How can you vote for so-and-so when they've done this harm and that harm and that harm? Or this person says he's going to do this to you in the future. You can't vote for that person, right? So when you understand the game and how it's played, and this is all power politics, right? It's just power politics. Like, again, even like everything that's happening right now, I personally believe that once the elections are over, most of it's going to subside, right? Going to go back to maybe pre-election anti-Muslim hysteria, which is very relatively low, right? Until we're coming close to the next election. There's going to be an election next year too, right? Right? So maybe it'll stay with us until 2026 is over, because there's going to be the congressional elections as well that's coming up right now, and so you have these parties vying for one another, the Democrats, the Republicans, the conservatives, progressives, that they're vying for power with one another, and they will employ or exploit any particular pawn they can in order for them to remain in power, to increase their power, right? And so we just have to remember that, keep that in mind, that this is an element of this. And then every non-Muslim is a potential Muslim. And the people who are manipulated, they're victims, right? And we have to see them that way. Say you're a victim, right? So when people talk about Islamophobia, for example, I don't like to use that term, because I feel like a phobia is an irrational fear of Muslims, right? Now, a lot of people are afraid of Muslims, but I don't consider it to be irrational fear, right? With a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of those people, I don't think it's irrational. I think it's a rational fear. But that fear is fed by the narrative, right? So they hear a narrative, and so they don't know any Muslims. They never had a conversation with Muslims. They don't live next to Muslims. And so they themselves have a fear of Muslims as a result of that. And I remember when I used to be a chaplain before I moved out here to California. I'm actually originally from Philadelphia and Chicago, but I've been here in California since 2007. But before coming here, I actually worked in the prison as a chaplain. And I remember this Christian guy, one time he came into my office, and he said to me, he asked me a question. He said, Brother Imam, he said, listen, I've been meaning to ask you this, but I've been afraid to ask you this. And I'm actually afraid to ask you this right now, even this moment. But there's a guy who's in our choir who says he used to be a Muslim. And he said to me one day that the Quran says that you're supposed to bring Christians very, very close to you until they're so close that you take out your knife, you cut their throats.
Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Wow. And I started to just laugh hysterically. When I heard it, and he said, I know that sounds crazy. I said, I know it sounds crazy, it sounds weird, but I just wanted to confirm that the Quran doesn't say anything like that. And I said, no. And I said, well, I mean, you're still alive right now, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, but you have like the narrative. A lot of people are just victims of the narrative. They're victims of the powerful, right? And we have to interact with them in that particular way, that, okay, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that one thing that I like to say about him is that he was very effective. One of his most effective talents was that he was able to remove the anxieties that his enemies had about him, right? So for example, the powerful, they always want to remain in power. The powerful are always afraid of revolution, that someone's there trying to take their power away from them. And the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, he assured the mushrikeen, the leaders, that no, he wasn't trying to do that. They didn't believe him at first, and they fought him, right? But once he became victorious, he taught them, like for example, in Mecca, what he says about Abu Sufyan. Anyone in Abu Sufyan's estate you're safe, right? Uthman ibn Talha, who actually had the keys to the Kaaba, he sent Ali ibn Abi Talib to get the keys from him, and until he can open the Kaaba. So what are you doing? And after that, he returns it to him to say, here, take this, and it's for you and your family forever, right? So he said, no, I'm not trying to take your power. Attab ibn Asid, he was a young man, he was in early 20s, who had just become Muslim on the Fath of Mecca, but he had political experience. When the Prophet ﷺ, he actually turned his eyes on Hunayn, he left Attab in charge. And he said to Attab, he said that if I had known anyone more fit for this than you, then I would have placed him over you, right? So the Prophet is teaching them, and in Hunayn, same thing, you know. So he's giving these people who are the chiefs of Arabia, you know, when he conquers Hunayn and they have all these spoils, he gives 100 camels to this one, 100 camels to that, 100 camels to this one, right? Safwan ibn Umayyah, he borrows his armaments, and then he returns it to him along with the 100 camels, right? And he says the Prophet gave me what he gave me when he was the most hated of people to me, and he continued to give to me until he became the most beloved of people to me, right? Wow. So in other words, he disarmed them. That he alleviated their anxieties, you know. So, and I think that's really important when Muslims do da'wah, is that they understand, okay, why is this individual opposed to me and opposed to Islam, right? You know, what particular image or perception of Muslims and Islam does that person have, right? You know, and how do I break through that? How long will it take, right? What does it demand of me? It's going to demand a lot of patience. And I'm sorry to go on, you know, for too long, but I felt that may be some use.
Yeah, very, very important. Before we conclude now, what would you say to those who have been programmed by the hate machine, by the fear mongers, by politicians like this? They're tuning in. They like the message. They've been, you know, seeing the shows. They like the pure absolute monotheism, only worship the creator, not the creation. The original goodness in Islam, that every child is born pure, good from the start. You don't have a stain on your record as soon as you're born. They love these principles of Islam. You know, this is the meat and potatoes, I call it. But now they've been programmed, you know, with the billion-dollar industry that's pushing out all this. So they're a little bit confused. You come from a background, you used to be a Christian also. You understand the mindset, the temperature of the environment. What advice would you give them? And the politicians over there that are spewing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, for the people, first and foremost, I would say to them that we just went through a very trying period during COVID, the lockdowns, right? And one of the models or the things that was being demanded of us is for us not to do our own research, right? You know, we were being condemned, you know, especially the MAGA people, right? You know, who themselves are largely, we say they resisted, you know, many of them resisted the vax itself. You know, when people started to do their own research, we were told, oh, you can't, who are you? You're not a scientist, you're not a doctor, how can you do your own research? You know, you have to defer to the experts, right? I'll say to you in the same way that you were told during COVID, the COVID lockdown, about Islam, do your own research. Do your own research, right? So if a person claims that the Sharia is something, then you ask them first and foremost, what is Sharia? Two, you ask them, what are the sources of Sharia? Where does this information come from? Does the Quran say this? Okay, where in the Quran does it say? Let me have a look at it. The Prophet Muhammad said? Show me where the Prophet Muhammad said this, right? But then also we expect for you also to consult Muslims too, because you have to understand as well that even if you're able to identify a verse or a hadith, then sometimes there's context that's missed, because the Islamic sources are to be read as an integrated whole, right? But if you take a single verse or a statement of scripture, by itself, independent of everything else, then naturally it can be read in multiple ways, but things are revealed in context, right? So that's my message to the general masses of people who themselves are being alienated from Muslims and Islam through this false propaganda. But with regard to the politicians, I say to them that there's a judgment day, that God is going to reckon you, whether you like it or not, whether you believe in it or not. A judgment day is coming, that you have been placed in a position of authority and given responsibility over the rest of us. And it's because God chose you to take on a burden that he believes and he knows that you have the courage to actually carry out, right? But you have to be virtuous. You have to be a virtuous person. You have to be a person who's moral. You have to be an honest person, right? And you radicalize people. You harm people. You harm human community when you tell lies about others. And actually, you're serving Satan, right? This is devil worship that you're doing here, right? When you start to spread lies about people, and there's a day of judgment that will be coming for all of us.
And where can people find you here? They got you you're on X, Dr. Abdullah Ali. Leave us with where people can connect with you at.
Yes, you can find me on X, Dr. Abdullah Ali. I can't remember my handle. I think is at Ben Hamid Ali. I have a website, benhamidali.com. My organization website, Lamppost Education Initiative, lamppostedu.org. Also have a Substack page for those who are interested in that. So there are, of course, multiple ways that you can connect with me, and looking forward to, of course, communicating with everyone, inshallah.
Thank you for spending some time with us here in the audience.
Well, thank you, Eddie. I appreciate it. Wa alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. And thank you guys for tuning in. I want to get you a gift from me to you so you can see for yourself what the Quran is about. Go to TheDeenShow.com and we'll get you a free copy from me to you. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum.